All right, well, good morning, everybody. We are in week 3, the final week of our series, First Fruits. Welcome back, you spring breakers. We had Florida, we had Mexico, we had people in Aruba last week, so welcome back from near and far. We're excited that you guys are joining us today. Those joining us online, want to thank you for spending your Sunday with us as well. Our live stream is taking off. Last week we had, I think people from, it's probably all our spring breakers, but there was like 5 states. People tuned in from 5 or 6 states, 40-something people tuned in last week to watch live. So that's in addition to you guys. We had another 40 people joining us online. So yeah, welcome them. Thank them for being with us today. It's exciting that we're able to offer that opportunity for people to tune in from wherever they're at and be a part of what God's doing here at A Fresh Wind. Want to recap quickly where we've been, and then we'll jump into where we're heading today. Week 1, Pastor Tim preached a message called The Importance of Giving Our First Fruits. And so he called it First Things First, that we need to give God our first fruits. Not second best, not what's left over at the end, but we need to give God our first fruits. And last week, we said that obedience is greater than sacrifice. And in about 54 minutes and 37 seconds, something like that, I told you what that means. It was crazy. I heard the nurseries were going nuts, kids screaming everywhere. Larry said way too long. He must have been back with the kids last week. So I want to apologize. I'm going to try to get you out of here a lot sooner today. But we said that obedience is greater than sacrifice. And so to sum it up in one sentence, here's what you got in 54 minutes last week. Our obedience unlocks God's favor and blessing in our life. Amen? Amen. So I guess I could have said that and we could have all went home last week. Today, I want to preach a message called The Privilege of Sharing. Now, how many of you have ever played a pickup basketball game, or maybe you went to gym class growing up and they had everybody line up, right? They picked team captains, and then they said, what we're going to do is we're going to let those team captains begin to pick their team. Anyone ever been a part of something like that? And so, right, I would obviously be a team captain because I'm, just athletically gifted like that. And so they're obviously going to pick me. And so it'd be me and then someone else who's not nearly as gifted as I am. But we'd be up here picking. We'd say, okay, well, I want him and I want her, and then I want him and I want him and I want her and I want her. And then finally, we'd get our team settled, and you're sitting there waiting. You're sitting on the bench waiting, and no one's picking you. Anyone ever been the last pick? You don't have to raise your hand. I'm just kidding. It was like, yep, been there. No one wants to be the last pick, right? Like, that is so devastating, and you're sitting in gym class with all these people. It's humiliating. All these cool, athletic, gifted people get picked, and then, nobody thinks I'm any good at this. And so it is a horrible feeling to be picked last, if you've ever had that happen to you. And despite what you might think, because of my, just natural physique, I have been picked last before. I know that's shocking to you, but it stinks. But can I say this? Some of us tend to treat God like that 6th man on our basketball team. We pick all the other people first, and then it's like, oh, well, maybe God. I should probably put God on the team. I should probably pick him. And so we spend our money on our shopping and on bills and on our utilities and on our kids' school. We spend money getting them into soccer and piano lessons and guitar lessons. And we spend money on all of these other things. And then at the very end, if there's anything left over, well, then maybe I'll give a couple bucks. I could maybe afford that, give a couple dollars. I could do that. And so God becomes the last pick, and he's sitting on the bench watching what we've done. And just like we don't want to be last, listen, God doesn't want to be last in your life either. In fact, he expects us. This is the point of the series. He expects us to consider him first. First. That he should be first in our life. And so much so that he introduced this concept of first fruits. And we find it all the way back in Genesis, the very beginning. You know, God creates the heaven and the earth. He creates Adam and Eve have some kids. And right there, we have this idea of first fruits and giving God our best, our first and our best. If you've been following through the Bible with us, you've been listening. God has been laying out the law to the nation of Israel. They've been wandering in the wilderness. He's trying to teach them how to be a nation. He says, I'm going to give you this land. You're going to go in and you're going to enter and you're going to occupy this land. And when you get there, this is how I want you to live. And when you plant, I want you to set aside a portion of that and I want you to give it to me. The first of your harvest, I want you to give it to me. First fruits. God expects to be first in our life. Now here's where this whole illustration kind of begins to break down, because it's like sitting in gym class and picking everybody for your team and leaving LeBron or Michael Jordan or Zion sitting on the bleachers. You know, I mean, how insane would that be? Like, I got Susie and I got Jimmy and like LeBron sitting up there like, hello? You know, like if you pick LeBron, everybody else can sit down. You don't even need the other 4 players. Just let them go. We got, me and Bron, we got it. MJ and I, we got this. And listen, this is the reality in your life. If you would start by putting God first, everybody else can sit down. You don't need anything else if you pick God first. And I know you think that you need that self-help book, and I know that you need that course, I know you need that budgeting class, and I know that you need this thing and that thing, and you need the friends, and you need this retirement plan, and you need all of these things. But if you just pick God first, then this is what the promise of Scripture is. Then all these things shall be added unto you. Seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and then He'll take care of the other things. He says, no, you don't need to worry about the birds of the air, what you're going to eat. You don't need to worry about what you're going to wear. You don't even need to worry about your very life. Just seek me first. And then all of these things will be added unto you. How insane would it be to leave Michael Jordan sitting on the bench for your basketball team? And how insane that we try to live our Christian lives with God on the bench. With God on the bench. And we wonder why life isn't working out the way that we thought. See, first fruits means offering to God our very best without hesitation or regret. And this includes our finances, our time, our gifts, our talents, whatever He asks from us. And so in Luke's gospel, we read of the striking contrast between 2 kinds of givers. And so Jesus has been teaching in the temple it's going on for about a chapter or 2, and He's teaching, and these Pharisees and religious teachers, they're coming up and they're asking Him questions, they're trying to trick Him, but the crowds are just growing to listen to Jesus teach. And this is what we read in Luke chapter 20. If you have your Bible, that's where we're going to be, Luke chapter 20. If you don't have your Bible, I'm going to throw it up on the screen for us where you can pull out your smartphone, go to myfw.church and click message notes. You'll find it there. But in Luke chapter 20, verse 45, Jesus says this. The crowds around Him are listening, Luke observed, and He turns to His disciples, and Jesus says, beware of these religious teachers, or teachers of religious law. For they like to parade around in flowing robes and love to receive respectful greetings as they walk in the marketplaces, and how they love the seats of honor in the synagogues and the head table at banquets. Yet they shamelessly cheat widows out of their property and then pretend to be pious by making long prayers in public or preaching 54-minute sermons. Because of this, they will be severely punished. See, these religious teachers had stopped putting God first in their life. And instead of seeking God's honor and God's glory, they began to seek their own. And if you remember Tim's illustration a couple weeks ago, as soon as we step up onto the stage, God gets down. He's like, you got it, go. But if we want God to be on the stage, then we've got to get down so that He can step back up. And the problem is they stepped up into the spotlight. They wanted all the recognition. They wanted the respectful greetings. They wanted everybody to look at them and think, wow, look how spiritual they are. Look how smart they are. and they'd pray these long prayers. And he says this, when they did that, when they began to focus on themselves, it got so bad that they began to cheat widows out of their own property. All for financial gain? Scripture tells us that we're supposed to look out for the widows and the orphans. James says pure and undefiled religion is looking out for the widows and the orphans, and yet these religious teachers are now cheating the widows out of property and trying to make themselves look good in front of the crowds. They were picking teams, but in God's eyes, they had all the wrong players. And I told you last week that as soon as we lose sight of the mission, our focus begins to turn inward, and we begin to look at how to gratify our own selfish desires. That when I don't have a mission, I become the mission. And we say outrageous things like, I'm looking out for number one. You know, I got to look out for me. I got to do what's best for me. Why did all these basketball players leave? Why did LeBron go to South Beach? I got to look out for me. Why did he go to the Lakers? I got to look out for me. I just got to do what's best for me. When you lose sight of the mission, you become the mission. Just like Val said earlier, when you're the mission, there's never enough. It's insatiable. You can't feed it. You can't ever have enough. You can't ever have better. You can't ever have enough newer. So you become the mission. Luke then juxtaposes this story with another story about a woman who understood the importance of keeping God first in her life and trusting Him. And so this is the very next verse. It's a new chapter, but it's the very next verse. Jesus is still sitting in the temple, and we kind of catch him people watching. Hey, Eli. He likes the sermon, I promise. Cassie, don't be pinching babies in the sermon. Unreal. Anyways, we catch Jesus people watch. Any of you like to people watch? You know, you sat at Crocker Park or something, and you just like to watch people? Jackie's shaking her head like, yes, I do. Any of you watch people and then make up stories about their life? Anybody? Corey's like, yep. Like, that's a great time, right? Like, you got this idea. They're probably the most boring person you've ever met, but in their mind, you have built them up that they could be like in a superhero movie, right? Like, their life is so outrageous. This should be a documentary. Well, Jesus is people watching. He's sitting in the temple teaching, and something catches his eye. So Luke 21, verse 1 says, while Jesus was in the temple, he watched the rich people dropping their gifts into the collection box. They had their own giving center, and Jesus is watching the rich people drop their money in. Imagine if I stood back by the giving center, just to watch. I'm just going to observe. Huh, what? Huh. I mean, how insane would that be? Would you feel comfortable about that? Like, you know, I'm gonna give my money elsewhere, right? And so Jesus is sitting in the temple. He's watching the rich people, and they're dropping their money into the giving center or into the collection box. He sees it happening, and I think if Jesus was a pastor today, he's probably like, cha-ching! Like, right? Come on, boys! Like, put the ramen noodles away. And he's looking at the disciples. He says, "We're eating steak tonight." Okay, the rich people just dropped by the giving center. They put the money in. We're off the ramen noodles, okay? Finally going to get my kid to college. Like, this is going to be great. I mean, if Jesus was pastor today, I'm sure this is how he would talk. And he'd probably wear skinny jeans too. You know, he'd be spiritual like that. And he'd be so excited. Then a poor widow came by, verse 2, and dropped in 2 small coins. You just think, well, I mean, at least she did something. You know, it's not like the rich people gave. I mean, they're the ones paying the bills and keeping the staff paid. You know, thank goodness for the rich people. But at least she did something. In the temple, people gave money into 13 different receptacles called trumpets, kind of because they looked like a trumpet. And this was located in the court of women, not because it was the only place that only women could be there, but it was a place that women could come and worship, the women and the children. But each receptacle had a different purpose. And so one of these trumpets or receptacles was for a temple tribute. One was for taxes. One was for fees. And so there was 13 of these. But some of them were for voluntary offerings. And it was after you've put in all of your taxes and all of your fees and all of your tributes and all of your dues, there were some that were just voluntary offerings, things that you could give to, maybe like a compassion fund, like we give to the compassion fund here. And so they could put money in for that. And there was just voluntary receptacles. And it says that the rich put in a lot of money. That the rich people came by and they're dropping in, I mean, just chunks of money. But it didn't really make a dent into how much they actually possessed, right? Especially if it was the religious leaders, because they're just thinking, I'll just cheat another widow out of her property, and then I'll get that money back, I'll just recoup it, it'll be fine. But they're putting their money in. But it's not really altering their life. Their lifestyle is not altered. And yet Jesus notices that this poor widow came by and put in 2 small coins. Now, Mark, in his gospel, notes that these 2 small coins were all the woman had to live on. This was it. I mean, nothing else. If I put it in here, I'm not buying more groceries. I'm not getting an Uber home from the temple. Like, I'm out. There's no more money left. This is all she had to live on. These coins called a lepta or lepton, and it was the smallest and least valuable Greek coin in use. They believe it was worth approximately half a penny to a penny. So she gave maybe 1 penny, maybe 2 pennies in value. That's all she had. It was all she had to live on. And Jesus notices that she comes by and she drops in these 2 small coins, all that she had. Now, this setup is important because Jesus is getting ready to say something that's so outrageous that it's true. It's hard for us to comprehend what he's getting ready to say. Verse 3, Jesus says, I tell you the truth. This poor widow has given more than all the rest of them. What? For they have given a tiny part of their surplus. But wouldn't a tiny part of a rich person's surplus still be more than a penny? I mean, if you got $100,000 and you're just giving a couple bucks, it's a tiny part of your surplus, but it's still more than a penny. What is Jesus saying here? But she, poor as she is, Jesus notes, has given everything she has. She's given everything she has. I wonder, have you ever given like that? Given everything you have. And I'm maybe not even talking about money right here. Maybe I'm talking about effort. Maybe I'm talking about time. Maybe I'm talking about strength. Have you ever just spent yourself? You gave everything you had. Maybe you played sports. I played football in high school. It's about the only thing I could do halfway decent. And man, I remember just giving everything I had, leaving it all out there, right? That's what our coaches would preach. Leave it on the field. Don't save anything. Put it all out there. Give everything you've got. And this is how this woman's living. She's giving everything that she has, not holding anything back. Have you ever done that? Have you ever lived that way? Where you've given everything that you had. I remember Joy and I first got married, we were, goodness gracious, we were poor. I mean, dirt, stinking poor. The first house that we started to rent, it was over in Lorain, and it's not uncommon for, cops to chase people through our backyard. Like, it was, hear gunshots every now and then, like people would break into my car all the time, just dump everything out all over the car. It was not a very good spot, but I could barely afford that. My parents come over. We had just moved in, and we're sitting there, and Joy and I are in winter coats and sitting on the couch, and as we talk, you could see our breath. I was too afraid to turn the heat up. I couldn't afford it. I couldn't afford to heat the house. My dad's like, you're turning the darn heat up. I'll pay the bill if I have to. You're not freezing like this. You're getting ready to have a baby. What is wrong with you people? But I was so afraid to turn the heat up because I didn't know how I was going to pay the bill. That's how poor we were. But I remember back then making the decision that we're going to give. And listen, back then I started giving 10%, and I've given 10% every paycheck since then. And I don't tell you that because I want you to think, oh, Ryan, wow, that's great, good effort. I just want you to know that, man, when it's all you've got to live on, and you don't know how the electric bill is going to get paid, but you pay it anyways. I mean, that's where this woman's at. She's given all she has to live on. This is it. $20,000 a year, and I'm giving you my last 2 pennies because it's all I have. Have you ever given like that? Have you ever put yourself in a situation where if God doesn't show up, you don't know how this is going to happen? I need 2 volunteers, a guy and a girl. People are thinking, man, you need to volunteer every week. Come on up here. Come on up. Gabriel, you sit down. I already got a volunteer. All right, I need a lady. Come on up. Come on up. Come on up here. Come on up here. I need a lady. Okay. Carrie, come on up. As I read this story, this kept popping into my head, and I couldn't shake it. You get to be the rich guy. You get to be the poor widow. I'm so sorry. Mason, we do love you. We don't wish any bad things to happen to you. Now, what Jesus observes here is that a rich person came and they dumped their money. So you can go ahead, you can dump your money in to the temple treasury. They gave a large sum. But then a poor widow came by. I know there's only 2 pennies in there. Now here's what I want you to see. They're shiny. They're nice pennies because it's all you got. You take care of them. Carrie, I want you to put that penny right up here. I want you to just let it go. And you can do the next one. Listen, if you want your giving to go the distance in your life, you have to give the right way. You guys can have a seat. Thank you so much. Give it up for them. Now, I want you to know something. All the money ends up in the same spot. It's all God's. And don't think just because you had a bad attitude when you give. Tim and I and Kathy, who does all of our bill paying, we're like, well, Joe wasn't very happy when he gave today, so we shouldn't pay our staff. No, we're going to pay the staff. I'm sorry. It's going straight to the nursery workers. We're taking it straight to Giant Eagle. We're going to buy some donuts. I don't care what your attitude is. It all ends up here, right? It's all God's. It doesn't matter how you give it. God's going to use it. It's all His anyways. Even the stuff that you kept behind belongs to Him. But this is about you. And if you want your giving to go the distance, it's not about the amount. It's about the how. How you give. And Jesus said, this woman gave more than all the rest. Because poor as she is, she gave all that she had. If we're talking to a financial advisor, he would say, you're an idiot. I mean, that's stupid. Don't do that. That's all you have to live on. You can't do that. But Jesus celebrates this moment in this woman's life because it reveals something about her and about who's first in her life, about where her priorities are. And so she gave all that she had. See, it's about having the right heart and having the right attitude. And if you want your giving to go the distance in your life, you've got to give the right way. Mother Teresa said, not this Teresa over here, a different Mother Teresa. She said, it's not about how much you give, but how much love you put into the giving. The Apostle Paul echoed something thousands of years before her that's real similar. He says that God loves a cheerful giver. That God loves when we give cheerfully. Two years ago, we were having our church council meeting, and it was coming up to January, and our budget was continuing to increase. We added staff. We tried to give some people some raises. We were trying to do some work around the building. And the question was, should we do You See What I See this January? Can we afford to do this as a church? It's something that we've done every January since we started. And for those of you who don't know what Do You See What I See is, Do you see what I see is simply this? In January, we tell you to take the money that you would normally give us and to go do something else with it. And not just anything else. We want you to look for a need out in the community, and we want you to go and meet that need. But that means you're not giving the money here. But we still have staff to pay. We still have lights to keep on. We still have the internet that we got to keep going. We still got donuts and coffee to buy. Otherwise, you people might not come back. Right? Like, it's not like the bill's just like, oh, we'll take January off too. Thank you. They still come. And so we didn't know, is this something that we can do? And our church council unanimously voted and said, yeah, we're going to do it. Whatever it cost us, we're going to do you see what I see this year? And so we made that commitment to keep on doing it. A week later, we got a check in the mail for $25,000. See, that's exciting. Someone wanted to clap for like a second. They're like, I don't know if I should. You can clap for that. It was exciting. And I'll tell you, I had a mini revival session in the office when I opened the envelope and saw 25. I was like, Tim! He's not even here. I had to call him. Tim! We just got a check in there, $25,000. And I always wondered, would that check have came if we decided not to do you see what I see? I don't know, maybe. But to me, it was God saying, you made the right choice here. That if you'll be faithful to me, I've got you. I've got you. And man, I was so excited when that $25,000 check came because you never know. I don't know if I'm going to be able to pay the nursery workers. I don't know if I'm going to get, unless people give, who knows? Who knows? So I was excited when that $25,000 check came. But a couple years ago, we had a lady, we had just done a series on giving, and she came up and she said, Pastor Ryan, I want to, we called them 5-minute sermons back then. Val does 10-minute sermons. Sorry, Val, I love you. But we called them 5-minute sermons, and she said, I'd like to share my story. And she says, I listened to that series, and I don't have a lot of money, but I started to give, and I wanted it to be a habit in my life. And so I just set it up as recurring giving. And so she just started giving. And I think she said it was like $25 a week or $25 a month or $25 a pay, $25. $25,000, $25. Can I tell you, I celebrated more with that woman than I did the $25,000 check. And I know that's harder to clap for because it doesn't sound sexy. It doesn't have all the zeros at the end. But for this lady to say, man, I see the need to make this a discipline in my life. So I'm not just going to say I'm going to give it. I'm going to set it up, recurring giving, so it happens automatically. Man, my heart swelled. I said, I got to get you up on the stage. You've got to share that story. I don't care how much the amount is, because it's not about how much you give. It's about how you give it. And here's a woman who doesn't have the $25 to spare. She needed it to pay her bills. But you know what she said to me? She said, after I started doing this, she said, I didn't know how I was going to afford it. I can't even make ends meet now. And I didn't know how I was going to make it happen. She said, I've not missed a single bill since I started. How does that make sense? You couldn't pay your bills before, you gave up more money, and now you're not missing bills. That doesn't make sense. But as someone who said, I'm going to put God first. I'm going to seek Him and His kingdom and His righteousness first and trust Him to add all these things unto me. Because He's a faithful God who promised to do it. And so God did it. All because she trusted. All because she trusted. See, Luke is not prescribing an amount required to give. Luke's not saying you need to go home today and give all that you have to live on. That's not the point. This is a study in attitudes, in hearts. And he's showing us the devastating effects that take place when God isn't first in our life. And he contrasts those to the poor widow who gave everything that she had to live on. The latter, the widow, is held up as an example to be followed. The former, Jesus says, I want to warn you to watch out for these kind of people. And when God isn't first in their life, they become first, and they'll manipulate you, they'll deceive you, they'll do whatever they can so that they get ahead. I want you to watch out for those people. It's a striking contrast and a caution to comfortable believers. The Apostle Paul, in his letter to the church in Corinth, shows us what this looks like at a corporate or a macro level. So in 2 Corinthians, if you can quickly turn over there, and then I'm going to be wrapping up. 2 Corinthians chapter 8. The Apostle Paul says this. He says, again, he's writing to the church in Corinth. These are Christians in Corinth. He says, I want you to know, dear brothers and sisters, what God in his kindness has done through the churches in Macedonia. They are being tested by many troubles, and they are very poor. But they are also filled with abundant joy. Well, that doesn't make sense. Tested by trials, very poor, filled with abundant joy? What is he talking about? Which has overflowed in rich generosity. Now, we had a poor widow who gave everything that she had. Now we have a church who's poor. I mean, this is a poor church. They got people here, they can't afford to pay the bills. This is not the affluent church out in the suburbs. I mean, this is like the backcountry church. They ain't got no money. Very poor. And yet their joy has overflowed into rich generosity. For I can testify, Paul said, that they gave not only what they could afford, but far more. And they did it of their own free will. I didn't have to stand by the giving center and make sure that everybody gave on the way out, Paul said. They did this all on their own. They begged us. This is crazy. We got a culture now that's like, I'm not going to that church. All they ever do is talk about money. I knew they were going to talk about money today. When you invited me, I said, no, I don't want to go because they're going to talk about money. And here I am. They're talking about money. Listen to this. They begged us again and again for the privilege of sharing. Whew. Isn't that good? For the privilege of sharing in the gift for the believers in Jerusalem. Now, the believers in Jerusalem, this is the Christian church in Jerusalem. They're facing all kinds of persecution from the religious leaders, from the government. I mean, it's bad. So Paul is going around, he's collecting and offering to provide aid to this church, these Christians in Jerusalem. And it says they begged for the privilege of sharing. I don't know, maybe they could sympathize. Been there. I understand. We're facing our own troubles. We're also poor. We have no money. And yet, they begged for the privilege of sharing. They even did more than we had hoped, for their first action was to give themselves to the Lord and then to us, just as God wanted them to do. Their first action was to give themselves to the Lord. You better be careful, because when you give yourselves to the Lord in this kind of way, it results in radical obedience. And God's going to ask you to do some radical things. And you're going to find yourself giving more than you can afford. And to beg for the privilege of sharing. See, Paul is seeking assistance for this impoverished church. And he highlights the extraordinary generosity of the Macedonian Christians. They're poor but filled with joy. This has overflowed into rich generosity. They gave more than they can afford. They did it of their own free will. They begged for the privilege of sharing. And they gave themselves to the Lord, then to us. And Paul uses this picturesque language to explain how a church that seems unlikely to have made an impact actually served God's mission more than the other churches. The church in Corinth, they believed, had a lot more affluent believers in it. Those people were a little bit better off. And Paul's writing to them, trying to spur on their giving by talking about what a poor church did. This is a church that no one's expecting them to do anything. And now they've become the example that Paul is writing about. See, we might not have the resources that some other churches have, but that does not excuse us from participating in the mission that God has called us to. You hear me? So I'm speaking to you now. This isn't Paul. This is Pastor Ryan. I know that we don't have the resources that some other churches have, but that does not excuse us from neglecting the mission that God has called us to. Our community is lost, and our schools are lost, and our kids are falling away from Christ, and our brothers and our sisters and our friends are dying from drugs, and our community needs Jesus, and we have a mission. And just to look and say, well, we're not as big as some of those other churches. We don't have the resources that some of those other churches do, is no excuse. It's no excuse. So Paul uses the example set by the Macedonians to spur the Corinthians on towards the completion of their gift, because this gift started in 1 Corinthians. Now we're in 2 Corinthians. This is his second letter. Listen to what Paul says. Verse 7, he says, since you excel in so many ways, you excel in your faith, your gifted speakers, I was probably speaking that week, your knowledge, your enthusiasm, and your love from us, I want you to excel also in this gracious act of giving. So this act of giving, it is because of grace that we do this. I'm not commanding you to do this, Paul says, but I am testing how genuine your love is by comparing it with the eagerness of the other churches. You know the generous grace of our Lord Jesus Christ. It's kind of Jesus jukes this whole thing. Though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, so that by his poverty he could make you rich. I want you to look at these other churches. And also, by the way, remember Jesus, the guy lives in heaven. His dad owns everything. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. He owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. That guy, well, he became poor for you, so maybe you should do something. Kind of Jesus jukes the whole thing. I love Paul for doing that. Like, you guys, maybe you should pay attention. Verse 10. And in this matter I am giving advice because it is profitable for you, who began last year not only to do something, I love this, but also to want to do it. Because you don't have to, you get to. You get to. I don't have to support this ministry. I don't have to give my time here. I don't have to give my talent here. I don't have to give my finances here. I get to. It is a privilege to honor God in that way. And Paul says, last year, you were the first, he said, not only to do something, but you were the first to want to do it. Man, would that be our attitude? That we are eager to be a part, that we would beg for the privilege of sharing. Verse 11, now finish the task. Now finish the task. So just as there was eager desire, there may also be completion. Finish the task. Desire isn't enough. He says we need to work to completion. So we have a mantra that we've used around here for a few years. We don't say it very often, but man, it's huge. We don't just give till it hurts. We give until it stops hurting. We don't just give until it hurts. We give until it stops hurting. What does that mean? We give until it's a discipline in my life. Because at first it hurts. I got to make some changes in how I give, and I got to make some changes in the amount of times I get to go out to eat and go to the movies and buy this thing on Amazon. I got to make some changes. So I'm going to give until it no longer hurts. It is a discipline in my life, but I'm also going to give until the need is met. I'm going to give until the need is met, that the situation no longer hurts. Paul says, whatever you give is acceptable if you give it eagerly. And give according to what you have, not what you don't. Quit looking at your neighbor, Paul says. This is about you. Give according to what you have. And if you do it, it's eager, and you do it eagerly, it will be acceptable. It's about your attitude and your desire. It says, let your eagerness lead to completion. Now finish. You started something. Now finish. In this series, we've learned that offering first fruits means offering God our best without hesitation. And we've learned that neglecting to keep God first has some unexpected results in our life. And the example of the poor widow and the Macedonians shows us that giving is a voluntary gesture that takes incredible faith and trust in God, that we give beyond what we can afford. And we trust God to take care of the rest. They show us that anyone can participate no matter how small or how large the gift is. That God is less interested in the amount that we give than the attitude with which we give it. And individually and collectively, listen, our offerings come together to make an impact that'll change this community and this city and eventually the world. Eventually the world. Guys, this matters to God. How we give matters to God. And I hope throughout this series that you have not heard, we want you to give a certain amount of money or you can't come here. That's not what this is about. I don't care how much you give. Care less. What I want for you is obedience. Because it unlocks God's favor and blessing in your life. That's what I want for you. God's favor and God's blessing. But it comes through obedience.